Hello to the side and back. My name is Tokika Uzuru, also known as Toki, and today we are going to be talking about retrogrades. And I'm about to go ahead and give you a good reason on why I decided to go ahead and talk about this. So as I stated in my last video, I was having a bit of a month. It seemed like everything that could go wrong went wrong in the span of 3 weeks. And while I decided to go ahead and just take a bit of a break and just not worry about it for the last week, I found out in the middle of it that it was because Mercury was in retrograde. So while I ended up having to deal with the effects of the Mercury retrograde last month, I decided that I was going to go ahead and inform whoever decides to watch this video on retrogrades and how to prepare for them. So let's start off with the first part. What is a retrograde? A retrograde is the illusion of all the other planets moving backwards from the Earth's point of view. Keyword here is illusion. They're not actually moving backwards. And because of the fact that we are on Earth and we can see the planets from the Earth's point of view, the other 8 planets are the ones that would seem like they're in retrograde. Each retrograde has a before, a during, and an after, otherwise known as a shadow. Most of the time, the before and the after, you can still feel the effects of the retrograde. Now, Mercury, Venus, and Mars have an extreme distance from where they started to where they end up whenever they retrograde, which means the effects that it will have would be more personal and more challenging. However, Jupiter and Saturn have less of a distance to travel, so those won't be as personal and as challenging. Typically, you would have about 2, maybe 3 planets in retrograde on your natal chart. However, if you do have 3 or more, which is pretty rare, it signifies that you would be a person that's largely out of step with the rest of the world and devoted to finding your own unique path in life. I had to go ahead and read that from the paper verbatim because I cannot remember stuff. But one, depending on where the planet is in your natal chart and what house it's in your natal chart, it will just signify that you're a person who needs to deviate from the norm on occasions in that aspect of life. So now we get to the part of the video where I explain basic information on the different planets during their retrograde seasons. Starting with the meme, the myth, the legend itself, Mercury, one of the planets that continues to mess up every electronic it's able to get its hands on. With the amount of jokes that we make about, oh, the world's crazy, Mercury's in retrograde again, it kind of holds up. As I stated earlier in this video, I was personally attacked by Mercury being in retrograde by basically having a good 3 weeks of absolute heck. Now typically, Mercury would go into retrograde about 3 or 4 times a year and would usually stay in retrograde for about approximately 22 days. The theme here is miscommunication, so not being able to say exactly what you're thinking, which is me every day, or not being able to express yourself verbally correctly, which again is me every day. However, it can also mess with files on your computer, any type of electronics that you decide to go ahead, that you either have with you or that you decide to buy during said retrograde, and could also start arguments for no reason. Overall, retrogrades in general are times to reflect, redo, rethink, and review. Do not start anything new during a retrograde. It might not last. Now on to Venus, the type of retrograde that actually messes with love, feminine energy, and finances. Now, Venus in retrograde happens to be one of the rarest retrogrades to experience because it is typically in retrograde about 7% of its full rotation or time in rotation. And as I said, it tends to bring up more relationship and financial issues. On to Mars, which is more aggressive. Now, Mars goes into retrograde about every 26 months and typically stays in retrograde for about 2 to 2.5 months. Some of the things you might end up experiencing is frustration from the lack of forward movement, any type of negative emotion that society decides to tell us to hide behind a mask. You're more likely to just throw caution to the wind, not think, and just act, and are likely to release said repressed martial instincts. For example, anger. Please, for your safety and others, any type of appointments that have to deal with sharp objects, reschedule it. And now we're on to Jupiter, the planet that deals with luck, fortune, and wisdom. Typically, it goes into retrograde about every 9 months and tends to stay in retrograde for about 4 months. During this time, you will end up experiencing intense spiritual and philosophical growth. Think of it as like an existential crisis every 9 months. Overall, it's a bit of a nudge, a course correction. But now we're on to Saturn, which does that but aggressively. Typically, Saturn tends to deal with things such as karma, time, responsibility, wisdom, boundaries, and limitations. It goes into retrograde once a year and typically stays in retrograde for about 4.5 months. During this time, its limitation powers are enhanced by like a lot. It's a good old reality check for everyone. This is also the perfect time to go back and review lessons that you have learned. And also let go of things that don't particularly help you. Ideals that don't particularly help you. And now we're on to Uranus. You're honest. Uranus, there we go. But this planet specifically deals with uniqueness and unpredictability. Like Saturn, it typically goes into retrograde about once every year, but stays in retrograde for about 5 months out at a time. And its main message is change your ways or deal with the consequences. I wrote down change or die, but I think it's not physical death. It gives you a moment of reprieve, lifts the mist of whatever idealistic illusions you decide to go ahead and create, and hits you with a reality check of what life actually is. A bit of peace from the unpredictable chaos that is. Next up, Neptune deals with ideals, illusions, and anything spiritual. Only goes in retrograde about once a year and stays in retrograde 5 to 6 months at a time. And it gives you the reality check that just, tries to take the rose-colored glasses that you're wearing off because Uranus, but it's a bit more nicer than Pluto. Now, Pluto specifically happens to deal with renewal, rebirth, hidden, and subconscious forces. Typically, it goes into retrograde about once a year and stays in retrograde for 5 to 6 months at a time. Unlike its counterpart that does the reality check thing, it decides to go at you with force. Pluto in retrograde should be almost as feared as Mercury in retrograde. Because instead of just lightly lifting up the fog or like pulling the glasses off of your face, it just decides to hit you with a reality check. it decided to go ahead and hit you with a vibe check, backhand. It is like an atomic bomb. It's supposed to blow up and destroy any type of idealistic illusions that you decide to go ahead and create. So, the overall message for this video is don't mess with the retrograde. So in doing so, I will go ahead and start the stereotypical YouTuber outro, where I, as a stereotypical YouTuber, would ask you to do the following. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and be notified of whenever I post. If you want to, that's up to you. Comment down below if you have 3 or more planets in retrograde on your specific birth/natal chart. I've been Toki Uzuru, also known as Toki, and this is Toki saying Toki out.